Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour, Annie. My name is Kimberly Wahama Deshane, and I am the Operations and Events Manager at Northern Ontario Angels. And today I'll be your moderator. Northern Ontario Angels is one of the top angel organizations in North America. We've been instrumental in closing 433 deals to date since our inception, totaling more than $643 million. We are governed by a regional board of directors and have an executive director on staff along with myself. We have 8 part-time consultants who are on the ground working with entrepreneurs to prepare them to become investment ready. And one of our NOA consultants today is Randy Talent from the Sault Ste. Marie Algoma region. They also sign up new investors across the region and around the world to help entrepreneurs build their business and provide jobs and economic development across Northern Ontario. Just a few Zoom items before we get started. I would ask that you please mute your audio and video channels as you come in, and please provide your questions in the chat or video at the end of the presentation. We are recording this event to share on our social media and website. Welcome everyone to our virtual event today, Dig Deep into Digital Intelligence, co-hosted by Northern Ontario Angels and Digital Intelligence Group. While we are meeting virtually co-hosted from Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie, we would like to acknowledge that we are in the Robinson-Huron Treaty. The land on which we gather is the traditional territories of the Atikameksheng, Anishinaabeg, and the Anishinaabe, home of Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, and the Métis Nation. We also acknowledge all the traditional lands on which all of you in attendance gather today. I would like to now introduce our presenter. Kevin Rusnell, CEO of DIG, has over 15 years of experience in the digital space. His experience ranges from leading complex consulting jobs in some of Canada's biggest financial and education institutions and hospitals, as well as some deep-rooted experience in the hospitality sector with Fairmont Raffles International. Kevin has spent most of his career in the boardroom with C-suite executives, helping to drive the direction of these organizations by utilizing quantitative data, innovative ideas, and industry insights. Please welcome Kevin Rusnell.
Thank you very much, Kim. Appreciate the introduction. So I always like to start off these presentations, and in a webinar format like this, we really don't have a good gauge for what type of individual we're going to have at them, but I like to kind of set the kind of basis of understanding first, and then dive into something that's a little bit more complicated, and that's just kind of how I like to run them. There was a pretty good introduction there, but who the hell am I and why should you even care what I say about digital marketing? As Kim kind of pointed out, I mean, I've worked with some pretty big organizations over the years. I've obviously had a pretty long career in the digital space, and now actually doing quite a bit of work in our office now that we share with Village Media, which you can see on this list. And so when we look at when I look at the digital consulting world and why it's sort of important, and by no means is this a pitch for why you should work with me, but I think it's important to kind of point out why digital consulting is important and how it's kind of changed organizations. And so, if you look back to, say, mid-2000s, as everybody started to rush into the digital space and businesses really started to change, we had this like transformative effect of digital wasn't necessarily something that you had to do, but it became mostly what your business was in a lot of organizations. And so some of the organizations on this list that you will see, that's very much happened to them. And some of them are now pure play digital organizations. And we will actually go through a couple of those examples as we get into the presentation. So I like to keep this somewhat interactive. And so I always like to pose the question to the audience. And if anybody does chime in, it will be very helpful for me because it gives me something to talk about when I actually get to kind of the live examples. But I always want to ask the question, what is the biggest challenge your business faces or businesses face from a marketing perspective? If anybody can enter that into chat, if anybody feels so brave, that would be fantastic. And as you're doing that, kind of go over some of the basics. And so remember, the question coming back was, what is the biggest challenge? Overall, out of everything, what is the biggest challenge your business faces from a marketing perspective? So the basics, I always say, let's get everybody up to speed and like kind of set a little bit of a base ground rule. So some of you might have quite a bit of marketing experience. Some of you might not have a ton of marketing experience, but I always say that, you know, your marketing journey starts with a little bit of a digital deep dive. And so if you think about in the past with all the traditional channels, people would, you know, think of marketing as, oh, we've got this great brand, or, you know, we've got this great product, and then think of marketing from that standpoint. I always say now everything starts with looking at what your digital presence is, because that's how people are going to find you. And so when you're really thinking about how you're going to start to approach marketing, doing somewhat of a digital deep dive is very, very important. And I usually say that's step number one. And that's a lot of what we're going to cover in this presentation today. So so for my clients, I mean, obviously web and app development have been kind of what the cornerstone of what their whole digital ecosystem has been. And so that's what a lot of people think of when they start that digital deep dive. So what that means is you're obviously going to, and I'm starting to get some chats in, which is fantastic. Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate that. And so your website is really, and touching on your point, Joseph, what lets your customers know who you are. And so any information you have on your website is obviously very relevant to how people gather information about your brand or business. And then that can extend even further into the actual app development side of it. If you've got a mobile app, that can also be an extension of your website, or it can actually be a functional product, or maybe it is your product or your business. And so that's kind of, you know, step number two. So we've got the digital deep dive. Then we take a look at, okay, well, what does the web and app development side of our business look like? And then we kind of move into what people traditionally think as marketing is marketing. And so I really think that, you know, creative services, which have kind of been what people traditionally think of from a marketing standpoint. So that includes things like brand, what your actual creative looks like. You'll probably actually have ads in market. If your business is currently up and running, you'll probably have some advertisements, could be billboards, postcards, you know, digital advertisements. That's what people traditionally think of from an advertising standpoint. But what I want to do is kind of challenge everybody to shift that expectation of marketing from being such a creative thing and bring it back to something that's actually quantitative. And so that's what my whole business has always been built on, and my whole career has been built on, is instead of looking at the beautiful pictures, and as you will see, there's a big, nice graphic behind me that a graphic designer did, never to take anything away from them, but bring it back to what is that quantitative data that we can really look at from a marketing standpoint to help drive our digital marketing and even our overall marketing decisions. The fourth part of kind of the marketing journey is, what is the media planning and buying? And so that's the actual act of going out and planning your media campaigns for the year and actually going out and buying those. This kind of correlates a lot with the creative side of things, but it also correlates with the actual quantitative side of things. And so I didn't really highlight it when I started this presentation, but the presentation really is about how digital data drives performance in marketing efforts online. So the media planning and buying side of things is, you know, very much a very important part of how we actually get people to that website that we talked about in step number one. And doing a good job of this can actually save you tons of money. And so when you go out, you actually go talk to a media supplier, and it could be the Bell Canadas of the world, the Rogers of the world, Village Media. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Anyone that's actually selling media, they will give you a rate. That rate is typically really, really, really high. And so they'll call that your rack rate. And it's priced in many different ways, but that rack rate, and this is an important piece of information for anybody that is actually actively going out and doing their own marketing, that rack rate usually can be negotiated down quite considerably. Well, if you think about it, a 30 or 40% decrease in that overall advertising spend is going to net you that much more advertising when you actually go out and do your media planning and buying. It actually will change the decisions you make from in terms of what media you actually do buy. So this is a massive undertaking. It's usually, you know, step 4, I say, in the journey, but media planning and deciding where you're actually going to go out and buy media is very important for your overall success of your end advertising campaigns. Like I kind of said a little bit at the start of this presentation, I do want to go through some of the basics here and then kind of bring this back around to give you something to take home in terms of like something that's actually going to be tangible for your business. I try and leave that hook so people stick around to the end to actually see what I'm going to say, or you can watch the recorded version. But I won't go on for that long. So we only have about a 30-minute presentation or 40-minute presentation here planned. But part of this conversation is going to be part of that end hook in terms of what we can actually provide to you in terms of value in a webinar like today. So coming back to what I was saying, if you go through that media planning phase and you actually look at, say, a bunch of different areas where you can go buy advertising, you can use those different media suppliers to be able to pit them against each other and get a better rate, which then ultimately ends up netting you some more marketing dollars, more marketing reach. So I talked a little bit about some of the media suppliers that you can go to in terms of big organizations, but these are some of the big organizations on this slide. So there's obviously the Google world. So for those of you who aren't familiar, when you go into Google and you search for something, there's a set of ads that come up at the top. That's called Google search engine advertising. And it is very valuable in terms of being able to drive people to your website. Excuse me. And then there's the display side of things. And so Google actually owns about 80% of all of the display inventory on the internet. If you go to any major website, any major news website, say like the Globe and Mail, for example, or Report on Business or CNN, and you're seeing ads on the right-hand side, a lot of those are actually served up by Google's display network. And those are actually ads that you could buy yourself. That's hugely valuable for a small organization that only has maybe a couple $1,000s to spend, because you can actually go buy a massive publisher without having, say, a $40,000, $50,000 upfront investment. They also have video. Second biggest search engine in the world, YouTube, owned by Google. Massive platform for being able to reach people. I'm sure it's probably being eclipsed by TikTok right now, as I'm sure everybody knows, but that is definitely a value add for people to be able to advertise on YouTube with their video. And it could be very much a commercial style advertisement that runs in pre-roll ahead of other YouTube videos. And then there's the shopping advertising side of things. And so if you actually have a physical product, you can advertise on Google Shopping, which allows you to bid on product specific searches. Then you've got Facebook, which is the second one down on the list there. Facebook and Instagram advertising, obviously most people know what that is. It's pretty massive and coming into the holiday season, especially for those e-commerce brands out there, becomes usually the workhorse of what their advertising campaigns are. And I'll actually dive into a little bit of an example at the end in terms of Facebook advertising gone really right, which is usually interesting to look at. And then there's like page post advertising where you can actually boost posts. TikTok, which is relatively new to the Canadian space, they actually just opened up their advertising early this year in terms of Canadian advertisers being able to buy it. Massively growing platform due to its very addictive nature and algorithm, which serves you up content that is very digestible to exactly what your interests are. That's obviously another form of media that you can buy as well. And then obviously the organic feed development. LinkedIn up at the top right corner. So there's some advertising that happens on LinkedIn and you can actually buy it as a media source, but for the most part, it's great to develop that as an organic platform. Email, which is the second one down on the right side, that is an absolute fantastic, I call it free, but it's not necessarily free channel. There's obviously a cost to developing those emails, but one of the most powerful channels for contacting your current customers. It's a very intimate channel, meaning that when I wake up in the morning at 9 a.m. and all of a sudden I get an email from somewhere, that hits me very close to home, and I'm typically really going to pay attention to what that email says if it's done right. We all know how many kind of spam emails we get, and they end up in our trash can because we're not interested in them. And then there's the traditional methods. And I'm not going to talk about those much today, but it is something that you need to have on your radar. And so that's radio, kind of print, and out of home, which is billboards and transit and stuff like that. So when you look at kind of that whole first set of things I talked about from a marketing standpoint, we really want to boil a lot of that down into the data and analytics services side of it. And so data and digital web analytics are very important when you think about how you're going to drive the success of your business. The nice thing about digital is that all of those things that I just talked about are 100% trackable all the way through to like full end net conversion, whether that's somebody purchasing your product or it's somebody actually, signing up for an appointment for you to come see them. If you run a service-based business, those are all very trackable. And that's really how you can start developing a very integrated advertising campaign that is net profitable for you. And speaking of being net profitable, I always say, I'll give you a bunch of takeaways, but one of the takeaways I think everybody needs to consider on this call is how you can focus on the lifetime value. So what is lifetime value? Well, in many different organizations, it can mean different things, but it's more or less how much revenue and profit am I going to extract from an individual in the history of that person's life with the organization. Some people own businesses where somebody buys one product from them and they never come back again. That's just the nature of their business. Some people own businesses where repeat business is massive to them. And so it's a little bit harder to calculate lifetime value when you've got a customer that continues to repurchase. But it's very necessary when we think about the third thing on this list, which is marketing profitability. And so we'll start at number one. So the cost per acquisition, which I will show you how to kind of get an idea of, is how we can determine, in digital a lot easier, how much we spend to actually acquire a net new customer. Now, that number is very important because when we pair that up with the lifetime value of a customer, when we actually subtract the cost per acquisition from the lifetime value, it'll give us the net profitability or loss of that actual advertising campaign. Meaning that if it costs me $20 to acquire a person, yet the lifetime value of that person is $150, well, that's obviously way profitable for me. And I will all day spend $20 to acquire people. But it's important to note that cost per acquisition isn't linear. It's not the same all the time, and it might really vary based off of business lines. I'll use, and I'm not telling anything that's a secret here, but I will use one of my clients as an example. So if you think about somebody like a McDougall Energy, for example, McDougall's got many different business lines. Home heat is one of them, where they provide propane to their customers. That propane is delivered to the customer's house every winter. And then therefore we can kind of extrapolate that probably the average propane somebody's going to get is worth between $2,000 and $3,000 every winter. Say the time they stay with us is about 10 years. Well, it's going to be about $30,000 in revenue would be the lifetime value of that customer. Well, that's only one of their business lines. They also have a whole business side of their business where they do business to business service, which could have massively different lifetime values. And so when we look at the actual cost per acquisition, we really need to look at it on a product by product basis versus the lifetime value on a customer by customer basis based off of what business line they're in. And then we can be able to determine what our marketing profitability is. It sounds super complicated, but it can be boiled down to be as simple as possible. You could even just know what your revenue is per year and divide that by how many users you get, although that's not necessarily a true lifetime value. But there's some very simple calculations you can use to do that. So if anybody wants to be a guinea pig and you want to enter your business into the chat, I will try and get to the point where I can actually do some live demonstrations with that business as I get into the later parts. If nobody does, that's fine. And don't worry, I will be nice. So I've talked about all of these things and they all kind of fit into this diagram somewhere, which looks ultimately super complicated, but it really is not complicated. The very top there is the digital strategy. And I think it's very important for anybody who is planning a business to at least spend a good portion of time, and usually this happens when you're working on your business plan or maybe slightly after, to think about what your digital strategy is going to be. Under that, it's like, what are your brand goals? Do you have a holistic way of planning alongside your business for the digital side of it? And what can we do from an innovative perspective? And this one's actually stolen from when I present to clients. So it says consulting and development, but more or less the development side of it. So how does that brand fit into things like design? So the brand of your actual company, the website, how does that fit into advertising and obviously media buying? And then the digital strategy planning, which can talk about business processes, And in digital only businesses, digital processes can make or break a business. Like if you think about how somebody gets onboarded into your organization, that is absolutely massively powerful to how you think about business. Then obviously those all filter down into kind of your media planning and purchasing, which I spoke about a little bit earlier. So I got to the part where I said, let's show me something. And so I want to go back to what Joseph said. So I asked the question in chat, and what is kind of one of the hardest things in your business in terms of from a marketing standpoint. And Joseph said, letting customers know what we do and who we are. And I think that's very fitting, very fitting for the presentation. And thank you for putting that in there. And it is a very big challenge for people, especially when they've got unique businesses. If you own a restaurant, it's very simple to tell people who you are. You serve food, you serve alcohol, and they get to show up and have a good time at your place. But when you get into some of the more complicated businesses or more obscure businesses, it becomes a very difficult conversation to have in terms of how you tell people, how your brand communicates that message. And it might be a combination of a bunch of different things that are required to do that. Website, like I said, is number one. Make sure you have really relevant information on your website and make sure that information is easily accessible. And Joseph said he does 3D printing and prototyping. So that is very, very interesting, actually. And so, I'm assuming this might be Maker North. And so it is a very interesting thing because you've got this obscure service that not a lot of people know about until they actually have a need for it. And so usually in a business like that, or you've got to create a need for it. But in a business like that, somebody will come up against a problem and then all of a sudden come to a need, and that will be the only viable solution for them. And that's kind of when they start that journey of trying to find who you are as a business. So we're going to start at page speed and how it impacts your performance. And so this is actually a brand new version of the tool that was released, and I put the URL there. I would encourage everybody to go to this. I've used TD as an example because I didn't want to pick on any of my clients for that matter, but anybody on the call. But page speed actually is a massive impact on your business. So this is what the tool looks like. You just input the URL right here. This is a really good takeaway for anybody because for every 1 second your page takes to load, your website takes to load, your conversion rate actually decreases by 30%, which is absolutely massive. So if you think about it, if it takes 5 seconds for your page to load, every second that page takes to load, you're losing another 30% of your audience. So having that page be very, very fast is important. This website will actually show you what it looks like from a desktop standpoint and a mobile standpoint. I've included TD's page here, which is actually terrible. So it's a score out of 100. You're supposed to be in like the top 90%. I rarely see people in there, but even if you're above 50, that's really good. TD's down here in 16% for mobile devices, which is terrible. And they've got some interesting metrics down here. And so on the left-hand side, see if you can see my mouse here, you'll see something called first content paint. Well, this is when you actually start to see things move on your phone. And if anybody has actually used their mobile device and tried to go to a website and that thing is taking 7.5 seconds to load, chances are, well, unless you have to do your online banking, I guess, you're not going to stick around and actually wait for that to load. But if you see something happening on the screen, it gives you a lot more, it's a little bit more feedback for you to actually wait for something to load on the site, on the page. There's something called speed index. There's time to interactive. So that's saying like, how long does it actually take for the site to be usable? And then, total blocking time, a bunch of other things in here. And then it'll actually give you a breakdown of what it is that's causing that to happen on your site. Now, some of this stuff is very technical, and I don't expect anybody on this call to even know what a bunch of this stuff is. But the bottom line is that you've got this now. You can take this to somebody that develops your website and say, hey, Mr. Agency that I've hired, or Mrs. Agency that I've hired for that matter, why is it taking my website so long to load? By the way, I've ran it through this tool, and here are all the things that we can do to increase that. Now, some of those things might have been things that you've actually done, like uploaded massive images to your site that are not letting it load fast enough. But oftentimes it's how your website was initially developed that have caused the speed to decrease on it. And then I want to get into a little bit of Google Analytics quick tips. And so I said this presentation was about digital data. That first point of digital data is that we need to go and check what our site speed is, because those metrics around site speed really impact conversion rate at the end of the day. Now I want to talk about a little bit about some Google Analytics tips. So most websites actually have Google Analytics installed natively. If you even have a WordPress site, it's very easy for your web developer to install Google Analytics. Chances are, if they were doing their job, they've set up some sort of analytics software on your site. Typically, Google Analytics is the first choice because it is free. And so you will have some information, you will have already some data. You can get to it by going to analytics.google.com. If you don't have anything in there, chances are you should reach out to your web developer and get some information about getting analytics added or getting access to your analytics account. This is what it kind of looks like. This is actually taken from one of my other businesses, but also a client of Dig's. This is called God's Country Clothing. And it shows over time how users go to the site, how much revenue we generate, and then what the conversion rate is up here at the top. So users, revenue we've generated over the period of time, and there'll be a date range indicator up here that you can change. It's not on this screenshot. The total conversion rate, which means like out of all the users that come to our site, how many people actually buy something? So 2.41% of people who come to the site buy something. That's actually incredible. It's because we don't do a ton of advertising. We have a bunch of organic stuff that comes to us. And then how many active users are actually on the current website right now. And then Google Analytics actually implemented this, which is really nice for new users. It's called Insights, and it actually pulls out some automated insights about your analytics profiles, so you don't need a consultant like myself to go through and tell you all of these things. It'll actually pull out a bunch of analytics based off of, say, the previous month in this example. Why do we have so many less users in October than we did in September? There's a navigation over here on the left-hand side, which will show you a bunch of different information about the data that your website's collecting, including what's happening in real time, the audience that's on your website, the acquisition, like where your audience is actually coming from, and then behavior, so how people are actually using your website. That's massively important. So it'll actually tell you what pages people are going to. And then if you have it set up, conversions. Chances are, if you've never been into Google Analytics, you don't have conversions set up, but it is something you can look into setting up, and it's actually not that difficult. Sorry, I need to switch slides. So I've done a little bit of a breakdown into one of my favorite spots in analytics, which is called, under acquisition, it's called Source Medium Report. So what a Source Medium Report is it shows you, or does, is what it shows you where traffic has actually come from to your website. This shows how much Google Organic has sent me, which means that I didn't actually pay for any of this traffic. People just went into Google and typed in Sault Ste. Marie Clothing Company or God's Country Clothing or something along those lines. How many people came from our organic Instagram profile? How many people actually came over from Sue Today, for example? And then there's a bunch of other things on here as well. You can actually custom tag things. So if you're actually going out and buying advertising, there's something called a UTM value, which you can add to the end of the URL, and it'll show up in here. From all of these sources, though, it shows me a lot of really great information. So not only is it showing me where traffic is coming from and how many users I'm getting, it's also showing me how many sessions, so how many times those users are actually coming back to the site, how many pages per session they're typically viewing, the average session duration, so how long are they actually spending on the website, as well as e-commerce data in my case. So this is a Shopify store. It's really easy to integrate e-commerce tracking. So I can see from Google Organic, actually 29 people purchased something for a total revenue of $1,878. So that's very valuable to me because I can see month over month how that's actually changing. And I will speed it up a bit because I know I am running out of time a little bit. So I'll keep going. Hopefully everybody's finding it somewhat informative. So then I asked the question, okay, well, we just looked at a bunch of stuff regarding Google Analytics. We looked at things like page speed. We've got a good feel for some of those high-level data points. Then I think about, well, if I'm a customer, and this is great for you, Joseph, talking about how we let customers know what we do. Well, how do I actually perform in search? So when somebody actually goes and looks for me, whether it's what I do as a service or even my brand name, how do I come up? So I use God's Country again for this first example. So this is how we appear when you search our brand name. So very nice. It actually shows a bunch of stuff related to our business, our sale is there. It tells you our story, has a bunch of our social pages. So like Facebook, Instagram, also our student day profile, which is fantastic. Oh, sorry. And I'll show you, oh, I didn't have it in here, but I'll show you on the next slide what happens when I type in something like Sault Ste. Marie Clothing Company. So this slide's a little bit out of order, but I'll go back to it. So clothing company Sault Ste. Marie, well, I didn't actually appear in any of those top results, which I mean is somewhat to be expected, right? We're a relatively small clothing store or clothing e-commerce brand. And there's a bunch of actual physical locations on here that are appearing a lot higher than I am right now. So then I look at somebody that's doing an absolutely fantastic job of this, and I'll use one of my clients as an example. And I'll tell a little bit of a story about this client. So 49th Apparel was a traditional on Queen Street in Sault Ste. Marie clothing business. They derived all of their business from people walking into their store and purchasing something, and then some shows that they would do throughout the year. This is a business that's totally transformed due to the pandemic and being forced to into a pure play e-commerce business. And so the benefit of their past, though, is that they ended up building a really great business, Google My Business profile. And so you can get to that by going to business.google.com. And that'll allow you to actually set up your location, set up your hours, set up what products you have, if you do have a location, that is, and then configure things like reviews on there as well. So people can actually leave reviews about your business. Well, because I'm actually manager of this page, you can see some additional information on here. Typically, you wouldn't be able to see that I got 2,300 views of the business. But there are a lot of things in here, even if you're a pure play e-commerce brand, that add a lot of validity to your brand. And so in 49th Apparel's situation, they actually have 4.9 star reviews on Google, which adds, if you're somebody in Calgary looking for 49th Apparel and you realize that it's a store in Sault Ste. Marie in Canada making Canadian made goods and they have 50 reviews, well, you now know that's a legitimate business with a legitimate person that you can talk to, and you're that much more likely to buy their product. So I think it's really important to analyze how you look at yourself in search and how you appear in search for both your brand name and then also the product that you serve up. So whether that's 3D printing in Sault Ste. Marie or 3D or consulting services or whatever it may be, how do you appear for the intent-based search and then also the brand search? It is very simple to set up Google My Business, and it does allow you to go in and actually start responding to some of the reviews that you are getting as a business. So if you give somebody really great service at your business, I always encourage everybody to go out and ask for them to go write you a review. That review increases how high in search you actually appear. So it actually has a search engine optimization quality to it, but it also adds a validator to your business as well. And so that's the important part. It acts as validation for your business. And then if you do end up with some, pardon my language, but shitty reviews, you can go in and actually respond to those reviews and tell that person why they're probably not accurate, leaving you a terrible review. So we can get into some live examples and questions. If anybody has any websites they want me to take a look at, I'm happy to do it. In terms of, this is pretty valuable service. I wouldn't typically do this on a webinar, but I'm happy to do it today. Or if anybody has any questions, I'll open up the floor for questions as well. Nothing? Okay. So that concludes for today. I appreciate everybody joining today. If anybody does have any questions, you can follow up with me, kevin@digdeep.ca. I'm happy to give you a little bit of my time to help your business out. No charge, of course, just to kind of give you some value from this presentation. And I hope that everybody took maybe a little tidbit out of this presentation that's valuable to their business. I know it was somewhat basic, but maybe in the next one we get into something a little bit more complicated.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We've I've been working with your team on doing a campaign with Northern Ontario Angels, and we've noticed some great results. And I learned a lot more today too. So looking forward to increasing our business on Google for Northern Ontario Angels.
Great.
Thanks everyone for participating in our presentation. I would like to thank our NOA funding agencies, FedNor and NOHFC, and our partners BDO, Bearskin and Parr LLP, Motion Arc Studios, N1 Solutions, Firedog Communications, and Squint Inc. Find us on our social media at northernontarioangels.ca and also to visit digdeep.ca. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Stay safe. Thank you. Merci, miigwech.